Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Ami and these are the headlines. The Afghan government says the Taliban have killed 3 of its security personnel in an attack on the Public Protection Force base in Paktia province. A spokesman for the provincial governor said 5 others have been wounded in the attack in Gardez city. Claiming the responsibility, the Taliban say they have killed 74 Afghan soldiers and wounded dozens. France's President Emmanuel Macron says he is ready to host an international aid conference in October to rescue crisis-hit Lebanon. Visiting Lebanon for the second time after the Beirut explosion that killed 200 people last month, Macron warned Lebanese politicians of sanctions if they fail to make reforms within 3 months. Lebanon's political parties have already named a new prime minister following a consensus forged under pressure from Macron. The remaining signatories to the Iran nuclear deal are meeting in Vienna in a bid to save the pact. This comes as the US ratchets up pressure for a return of international sanctions on Iran and an extension of the arms embargo. The United States withdrew from the deal in 2018 and imposed curbs on Iran. Saudi Arabia's King Salman bin Abdulaziz has sacked 2 royals over corruption allegations. Prince Fahd bin Turki bin Abdulaziz Al Saud was removed as commander of the Saudi-led coalition forces, while his son, Prince Abdulaziz bin Fahd, was relieved of his post as deputy governor of Al Jawf region. The 2 royals, along with 4 other military officials, have been placed under investigation. The World Health Organization says India has reported nearly 500,000 new COVID-19 cases in the past 7 days, the highest numbers globally. This comes as the country records over 800 deaths and almost 70,000 cases overnight, taking the caseload to nearly 3.7 million. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 4 people have lost their lives to the virus overnight, taking the toll to 6,298 with over 296,000 cases. Globally, the virus has claimed over 851,000 lives, while infecting over 25.4 million. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The Afghan government says the Taliban have killed 3 of its security personnel in an attack on a public protection force base in Paktia province. But they're claiming a responsibility. The Taliban say they have killed more than a dozen Afghan soldiers. A spokesman for the provincial governor said 5 others have been wounded in the attack in Gardez city. He said the attack started with a car bomb, which was followed by a brief gun battle. The spokesperson said the Afghan security forces killed the 2 attackers within 10 minutes. The remaining signatories to the Iran nuclear deal are meeting in Vienna in a bid to save the pact. This comes as the US ratchets up pressure for a return of international sanctions on Iran and an extension of the arms embargo. The United States withdrew from the deal in 2018 and imposed curbs on Iran. Since then, Britain, France, Germany, China and Russia are attempting to save the landmark accord. In a boost to talks, Iranian Atomic Energy last week agreed to grant UN inspectors access to 2 suspected nuclear sites. In Iraq, a car bomb has killed a woman and wounded 4 security forces personnel in the city of Kirkuk. According to officials, the driver of the car detonated the bomb as the vehicle was being inspected by security forces at a checkpoint. So far, there is no immediate claim of responsibility for the attack. Last year, US President Donald Trump declared an overwhelming victory over ISIS, but the group is known to be active in some areas of Iraq. Syria says an Israeli missile attack has killed 2 soldiers and wounded 7 others, causing infrastructural damage near Damascus. The state media said Syrian air defenses intercepted most of the Israeli missiles launched from the Golan Heights towards its military sites. Damascus said most of the missiles were shot down before they hit their targets. Israel has not yet commented on the Syrian media's claim. Hamas says it has reached a Qatari-mediated deal to end the latest escalation of violence with Israel on the Gaza Strip. Office of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar in Gaza said the agreement has been reached after talks with Qatari envoy Mohammed al-Imadi. Earlier, al-Imadi also held talks with Israeli officials in Tel Aviv. Israel constantly bombed the Gaza Strip every day since August the 6th. Tel Aviv accused Hamas operatives of provoking the airstrikes by attacking Israel with incendiary balloons. The Abu Dhabi Crown Prince says the UAE is committed to the establishment of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. This comes after Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called the UAE's deal with Israel a betrayal of Jerusalem and the Palestinian cause. In a statement, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan said the normalization deal with Israel was a sovereign decision in the favor of peace. He said peace is a strategic choice, but not at the expense of the Palestinian cause. The deal is the first such agreement between an Arab country and Israel in more than 20 years. The Arab coalition fighting in Yemen says it has shot down an explosive-laden drone over the Aba airport in Saudi Arabia's Asir province. It said the drone was aimed at civilians in the kingdom's southern area before being shot down. Yesterday, Saudi-led forces also destroyed a bomb-laden boat launched by the Houthi rebels in the south of the Red Sea. The Saudi-led coalition has been at war with the Houthi rebels who ousted the Yemeni government in Sana'a in 2015. Saudi Arabia's King Salman has sacked 2 royals and ordered an investigation into their alleged corruption in the defense ministry. Citing a royal decree, the Saudi state media said 4 military officers are also being investigated. The decree states Prince Fahad bin Turki bin Abdulaziz Al Saud would be removed as commander of the joint forces in the Saudi-led coalition fighting in Yemen. It said his son, Prince Abdulaziz bin Fahad, also will be relieved of his post as deputy governor of Al Jof region. The decree said the Crown Prince designated Lieutenant General Mutlaq bin Salim to replace Prince Fahad. France's President Emmanuel Macron says he is ready to host an international aid conference in October to rescue crisis at Lebanon. Visiting Lebanon for the second time after the Beirut explosion that killed 200 people last month, Macron warned Lebanese politicians of sanctions if they fail to make reforms within 3 months. Lebanon's political parties have already named a new prime minister following a consensus forged under pressure from Macron. Macron toured the devastated Beirut port and met President Michel Aoun for a centenary reception. He will also meet Lebanon's main factions. Lebanon's economic crisis is rooted in decades of corruption that landed the state with one of the world's heaviest public debt burdens. Turkey says it is in favor of negotiations for a fair share of resources in the eastern Mediterranean. Turkey's Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said this at a joint news conference with his Algerian counterpart Sabri Bokodom. He said if Greece and other countries are open to solving the dispute through dialogue, Ankara will always answer. He added that Ankara has sent its survey vessel earlier this month because no one in the international community heeded to its calls. Turkey and Greece have been embroiled in a conflict over jointly claimed hydrocarbon resources in the eastern Mediterranean waters. NATO says a Russian military jet violated airspace earlier this week as it was attempting to intercept a U.S. Air Force B-52 bomber. The alliance said the fighter carrier was flying near the Danish island of Bornholm when the Russian aircraft breached the airspace, which is a violation of international law. The alliance said Danish quick reaction alert aircraft were launched to counter the unauthorized intrusion of sovereign airspace. NATO said this incursion is the first of this kind for several years and indicates a new level of Russian provocative behavior. But Russia has denied NATO's claims. Russia's defense ministry said its fighter jet did not violate Danish airspace but flew over Baltic Sea's neutral waters. Relations between the US and Russia have reached a new low as Washington accuses Moscow of unprofessional interception of its plane in Black Sea. The US says it is looking to form a NATO-like alliance with its Indo-Pacific allies, including India, Japan, and Australia. Speaking at an online US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, US Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun said Washington wants all four nations to work in unison to impede a potential challenge from China. He added that Washington wants to form a coalition around the shared values. China has urged the United States to stop elevating its relations with Taiwan. In a news briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Shunjian said nobody should underestimate China's resolve to defend its sovereignty. She said the US should abide by the One China principle and the provisions of the Three China-US joint communiques. She said that the US is grossly interfering in China's internal affairs. Earlier, the US said it was establishing a new bilateral economic dialogue with Taiwan to strengthen bilateral ties. The US says it will ban more Chinese-made apps following an earlier crackdown on TikTok and WeChat. In an interview, White House trade advisor Peter Navarro accused Beijing of using the data collected by the apps to surveil, monitor, and track Americans. Navarro said China is going out around the world to acquire technology and influence. Meanwhile, US Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs David Stilwell has announced establishing a new bilateral economic dialogue with Taiwan. He said the US is intensifying support to the island to mount pressure on China. Beijing has repeatedly warned Washington and its allies not to interfere in its internal affairs and abide by the agreed One China policy. The US has vetoed a UN Security Council resolution on foreign militants fighting with groups like ISIS. The other 14 Council members voted in favor of the resolution aimed at prosecuting, rehabilitating, and reintegrating those involved in terrorism. The US envoy to the UN, Kelly Croft, said the text drafted by Indonesia was worse than no resolution at all. She said the draft failed to even include a reference to the crucial first step of repatriation to countries of origin or nationality. The US has called for foreign fighters to be prosecuted and rehabilitated back home. However, European states, including the UK and France, cite difficulties in collecting evidence for crimes that took place in Iraq and Syria. The US veto comes after Indonesia last week dismissed Washington's attempt to trigger a return of all UN sanctions on Iran. Belarus opposition leaders have announced a new political party called Vmest, which means together. In a video, leader Maria Kolesnikova said together the opposition knows how to exit the country's socio-economic crisis. Kolesnikova said for the past 3 months, the opposition has done much more than President Alexander Lukashenko has in 26 years. Another opposition figure, Viktor Babariko, said the new party will unite the country to adopt constitutional reforms.
I want to voice the main goals and objectives that we want this movement to solve. The first is to ensure the implementation of constitutional reform. As we have always said, the constitutional reform is the most important task today. Therefore, we are obliged to complete this process.
Belarus has been marred by violent protests over allegations of widespread rigging in the presidential polls by Lukashenko. Now moving on, in Afghanistan, the death toll from flash floods triggered by heavy rains has risen to 189. According to the government, more than 172 people have been injured. The Ministry of Disaster Management said over 4,000 houses have been destroyed. 13 provinces, mostly in the country's north, were affected by floods. Parwan is the worst hit province, accounting for 116 deaths and more than 120 injured. More stories to follow right after a short break. Welcome back. The infections tally in Brazil is nearing the million mark with more than 121,000 deaths across the country. India has recorded over 800 fatalities and almost 70,000 cases overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed over 851,000 lives while infecting over 25.4 million. More in this report.
With the US now showing signs of decline in COVID-19 deaths and cases, the outbreak is only getting worse by the day in India, parts of Latin America, and Europe. India's death toll has exceeded 65,000, with infections tally approaching 3.7 million. The European Commission said it would contribute $475 million to an initiative led by the World Health Organization to buy COVID-19 vaccines. Canada has made a deal with both Novavax and Johnson & Johnson to secure millions of doses of their experimental vaccines. While looming economic recessions are forcing countries to lift restrictions, the WHO has warned the hastiness can backfire.
No country can just pretend the pandemic is over. The reality is that this coronavirus spreads easily. It can be fatal to people of all ages, and most people remain susceptible. If countries are serious about opening up, they must be serious about suppressing transmission and saving lives.
In Asia, mainland China has reported 17 new imported cases and no domestic transmissions. South Korea has registered cases below 300 for the third straight day. The aggressive spread of the disease in Australia's state of Victoria finally seems to be slowing down.
We're certainly on the right pathway here. Cases continue to be driven down because of everything that everyone is doing, because of the restrictions that are in place. I've said yesterday we have to hold the course. These are low numbers. It can cause complacency for people who think I don't need to test. There's not enough virus out there, but testing is the pathway for us to drive these numbers down.
In Europe, France, Belgium and the UK are set to open schools this week amid mandatory mask use and physical distancing measures.
In Pakistan, the number of active COVID-19 cases has dropped below 9,000. The Health Ministry says the number of recoveries is nearly 95%. The ministry said nearly 281,000 patients out of 296,000 have recovered so far. It said the number of new infections continues to stand at 3-digit as 300 tested positive for the virus overnight. The ministry said 4 people lost their lives in the last 24 hours, taking the death tally to 6,298. Earlier, Prime Minister Imran Khan said his government aims to reopen schools with special measures from the 15th of September. Brazil has launched a nationwide anti-drug crackdown, biggest in the history of the country. Federal Police Chief Alves Seco said authorities have arrested 422 people with alleged links to the criminal gangs. Seco said the federal police have issued 201 search and seizure warrants across the country, while freezing up to $46 million in assets. He said the culprits will be charged with money laundering, drug trafficking, and directing criminal gangs from within the prisons. The police chief said the indictments carry a combined sentence of up to 28 years in prison.
This is the biggest operation in the history of the country and of the federal police in various aspects. In the number of warrants, mainly of members of the high command who are part of the leadership, the number of warrants of freestanding factions, it is the largest operation in the number of states, including the federal district. There are 20 states. It is the largest operation against money laundering. This is very important because we can say that this operation isn't just from one state.
US tech giant Facebook says it will block news on Australian websites if it has to pay local media outlets for content. This comes as a bill has been drafted for the Parliament that will require Facebook and Google to pay publishers for the content appearing on their websites. Facebook Australia Managing Director Will Easton said the company will stop allowing publishers and people in Australia from sharing local and international news on Facebook and Instagram. Easton said this is the company's last resort and will damage Australia's news and media sector in the long term. China's autonomous region, Tibet, has been at the forefront of the country's efforts to promote a green development. China has made a remarkable advancement in the conservation of the ecosystem over the past 5 years. This report has more.
China has stepped up protection of Tibet's natural resources such as grasslands, wetlands and forests. In Lhasa city, the area of water bodies in the Lalu Wetland National Nature Reserve has been expanded around 30%. This increased the number of migratory birds to over 15,000. The efforts resulted in the steady growth of Yunhai snub-nosed monkey, a severely endangered species. The steps to protect the ecosystem have greatly improved people's well-being.
We have felt continued improvement in the sanitation, ecology, and infrastructure in the Lalu Wetland Reserve whenever we come for a walk and fresh air. The environment is better and our sense of happiness is stronger.
The reserve is also home to other animals such as clouded leopard, snow leopard, and wild ox. On the whole, some 440 kinds of vascular plants and nearly 160 types of vertebrates have been found in the reserve. In the past 5 years, Lhasa has achieved a green transformation through afforestation and management of its water resources.
We've connected the Potala Palace and the Norbulinka Palace to World Cultural Heritage Sites through the expansion of our river system, which covers a combined 72.24 kilometers with the newly added 36-kilometer long water bodies measuring 26 hectares in total.
In Tibet, a total of 538,800 square kilometers in 74 counties and districts have been designated for ecological conservation. It has also built 47 nature reserves of various types with a combined area of 412,200 square kilometers. The Chinese authorities have invested about $9 million to improve infrastructure in the reserve.
France and Spain, once hard hit by COVID-19, are all set to ease pandemic restrictions. Authorities are opening schools, while employees previously working from homes are back to offices, but with a new normal. What this post-lockdown time looks like, let's take a look at this report.
Plans to reopen schools are under pressure as the new coronavirus cases continue to rise in Spain, where classes in most regions are set to begin. Children aged 6 and over must wear masks to class. At Larramendi School in Basque Country, works are underway to ensure social distancing, hygiene and ventilation. The faculty believes establishing a distance between students does not promote interaction, which is crucial to learning, but it is still a lot better than online classes.
The normal thing to do would be to have both classes working together in this space, but we will create two bubbles. Half will be on one side and other half in the other space. But every week we will swap the students to the opposite side, so they can be stimulated by different experiences and aren't always in the same space.
Seeking to avoid another lockdown, the French government has laid out new rules for all shared spaces in offices and factories. Donning masks and other novel coronavirus-era accessories is mandatory in workplaces. Although the rule has been deemed necessary by most, management said initially many workers had some qualms against the new measure.
In any case, all the startups have been informed by email. They are well aware of the current situation. So they know that they are required to put on and not aside their mask systematically. We have had a lot of little excuses for why they don't systematically have their masks on, but little by little it's gone a lot better. We have really started to get into it and to respect the protocols, and we are not divided on that anymore.
Although the World Health Organization hopes for the pandemic to be over within 2 years, it has warned the countries opening up without having control of the virus is a recipe for disaster. Hence, the world has to embrace a few restrictions as it attempts to get back to pre-pandemic routine.
Mexico's sweeping traffic woes have declined during the pandemic restrictions as the public resorted to riding bicycles to their workplaces. More in this report.
After the coronavirus SOPs were introduced in Mexico City, people started using bicycles instead of commuting in fully packed metro bus carriages. In a bid to stay COVID-19 free, Mexicans avoided metro, which is a fragile public transport system that commuted 5 million people daily prior to the pandemic.
I prefer to get on the bike rather than on the metro, so as to not expose myself to the situation that we are going through in quarantine. Also, it's a healthy habit.
This trend is a good news for the city's bicycle shops as well as because their sales surged 3 times during the pandemic.
People are scared to get on public transport. They want to do exercise. They want to be stronger, healthier. And the truth is, all bikes are selling very well, at triple normal sales.
The idea of bicycling commuters was particularly welcomed by the city's administration. So in an attempt to keep this trend alive, even after the restrictions are lifted, Mexico City's government has launched a new urban planning project of 70-kilometer-long biker lanes.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, India's gross domestic product has shrunk by 23.9% year-on-year from April to June. The contraction has put pressure on the government and central bank for further stimulus and a rate cut. Consumer spending, private investments and exports all collapsed during the world's strictest lockdown imposed in late March. The worst hit sector was construction, which contracted by 50%. India's Ministry of Finance said the economy was set for a V-shaped recovery. It said the economy should perform better in the coming quarters as indicated by a pickup in freight, power consumption and tax collections. European markets opened higher at the start of the new month as China's latest manufacturing data has boosted investors' confidence. European chip makers also get a boost from news that Apple plans to make 75 million 5G iPhones ahead of their launch later this year. European stock 600 is trading almost 0.5% higher. Frankfurt's DAX has gained almost 1% higher. CAC 40 in Paris is trading close to 0.25% higher, while London's FTSE 100 has so far shed close to 1%. Earlier, Asian markets traded mixed as mainland Chinese stocks reported marginal gains. Meanwhile, in the United States, the tech-heavy Nasdaq hit a record high at the open as Apple shares advanced. The Nasdaq Composite gained around 76 points at the start of the trading day. The surge comes amid positive manufacturing sector surveys in China and Europe that set the tone for upcoming U.S. factory activity data. The Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500 are trading marginally higher. Meanwhile, oil prices surged, reversing the overnight losses against the backdrop of an equities bull run and a sliding US dollar. And now the weather situation from around the globe. that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.